This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore.
I'm not much of a party goer. It's something where I think even as a young man, I wasn't much of a party goer. I went, most of the time out of obligation from most soirees, if you will. But I hate being trapped in locations and not being able to free myself of it. And some people list more toward that social interaction. It's never really been my thing. But I got to tell you, there's two cases. They're both married, conjoined, if you will, of two young women who had set out to go to a party, a celebratory party with family members back in 1986. And there's a photograph that was taken of them at this party. And they're together, shoulder to shoulder, smiling, eyes glowing. You could tell that they enjoyed one another's company. But what you couldn't tell was that would be the last photograph ever taken of them in life. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave Mack, you're a good friend. For those that don't know, I've came out of the Christmas holidays and New Year's, and the world kind of changed for me a little bit.
You think? Actually, Joe, as we begin, it is great to be doing this. I told you before we started, I'm so excited to be doing this today.
Yeah.
What y'all don't know is that Joe you've been treated for a lower back problem for about the last 6 months. Yeah. And it has gotten progressively worse. You've tried a number of things. And after the holidays, this was a continuation of that treatment, going in to have a treatment done to hopefully relieve. It was getting tough for Joe to even sit to do the show. And we were kind of concerned. I was hoping the holidays would give you a bit of a break, but that just sets the table to let you guys know where Joseph Scott Morgan is on the moment. He's headed to the doctor to go get a treatment done at the hospital, right? It was a same day thing.
Yeah, it was a same day thing. It was going to be an injection in my hip. And
but on the way there,
funny thing happened on the way to the form. So it turned out, some people would say, I don't know how many people would say that COVID is a blessing, but as it turned out, I was feverish, and knowing what I know about same day procedures, if you're feverish, they're not going to see you.
Right.
But I was in excruciating pain, more so than ever. And it was kind of a banded pain in the lower abdomen, which means it kind of, encircles your entire waist.
Right.
And as it turned out, I had super duper appendicitis, which my appendix was essentially adhered to my posterior abdominal wall. And it had also wrapped around my small intestine. And so with that said, those nerve bundles apparently are approximate the same area with the back pain. And so this has been going on for a long, long time, I think. And one thing led to another. Wound up having to have two surgeries, Dave, as you well know, because you've been very stalwart with Kim and I, and helped us through this process. But so I'm doing better, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for your prayers, and that have been aware of this. Nancy's put some stuff out, I think. But I'm on the mend, but it has been a grind. It has worn me down to a nubbin. But the thing about it, Dave, is that it's a pure joy. When you're able to return to that thing that you love and that you do. And I've had a lot of contemplative time, if you will. And still the one thing I return to in among all of this is that, it was scary. particularly in the face of having to have two surgeries, not just one. But you know what, Dave? I still have my life.
Right.
And these poor people that we discuss and the forensics surrounding their deaths, that opportunity is no longer there. They have been robbed of life. And of course, that's the case with Jennifer Duey and Michelle Xavier today. And I think that this is apropos. I'm glad that we're getting to start off with this case to tell the story, because it's obviously a very sad story, Dave. But this case occurred back in 1986, and Dave, through science, it had been a cold case, but through science, it finally came to an investigative conclusion in 2016. And now we have someone who has actually been held accountable in these two precious souls' lives, or the loss of their lives. And that's a joyous thing in a very sad situation.
You mentioned about going to a party. And by the way, just one very quick thing. As you are recovering, your voice will get stronger as you get stronger. And I'm so thankful. So many people have reached out asking about you, and a lot of our friends that we know have reached out to me because they didn't want to bother you and Kim. And I articulated that with you that, I kind of became a spokesperson for Joe,
I've been our point of contact.
Yeah. And that way, and I was able to keep everybody informed because they truly care about you, man. They really do. So
thank you, Dave.
Now,
and thank you to all our friends.
In this particular case, this young, they're 18 and 20 years old, these girls, and they're going to a dinner party, with friends and excited about it. And, this is one of those things where they were at the dinner party and they left, and they are seen together at 10:15 at night at a convenience store.
Yes.
Now, they're seen together at 10:15, healthy, happy, just goofing. But they have no idea of knowing that 2 hours and 15 minutes later, their bodies are going to be found. Not the girls, their bodies. And I was looking at this timeline and trying to figure out how we got from the convenience store to where their bodies were found in 2 hours and 15 minutes. This is two women, and we're not talking two old women. We're not talking about children either. We are talking about two young adults in health, in good shape. And I am mystified as to how this could take place that quickly and what actually happened to these two girls after they left that convenience store.
Well, the fascinating thing about this case, Dave, is that they had gotten together. They'd been invited that night to, and it's February 2nd, by the way, of 1986. And this is I have a hard time because I have a hard time with California geography, but it's in Fremont, California. Their bodies were technically found, I believe, in Dublin, California, which is not too far away. And it's on an isolated bit of road. But back to the events of that night, both Jennifer and Michelle, I found this kind of interesting, had both been stood up by their boyfriends. They were supposed to have been with them that night, and of course they weren't. And they had attended this party, and it's cold out. And, people think about sunny California and that sort of thing. We're talking February.
In Northern California.
Yeah, this is Northern California. This is just, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but this is like just to the west of the Bay Area. So you're kind of inland. And, when you see the photograph that I mentioned, you can tell that they're wrapped up. They're wearing flannel. They've got layers of clothes on them. But they're all dolled up. Their hair looks great. They have their makeup on. They were going out to enjoy themselves. And that is the amazing thing here, how it could be known that they would be at a convenience store and then poof, they're gone, like dust in the wind. You don't, you have no accounting for where they could go. And how, this is the thing that always amazes me about cases like this. Not that they're not tragic to have one person disappear, but Dave, we're talking two.
Right.
Two young women who are healthy, who what would you have to do in order to sucker them in so that you could get them into a compromise position so that you could do what's arguably one of the most vile things that you could do to a fellow human being, and not just in life, but in death as well. And we see that in the disrespecting of their mortal remains.
When you look at where they were in terms of the dinner party and where their bodies were found, there's about a 28-mile stretch there. And do we know, I mean, obviously it happened after 10:15. Do you think they were abducted from that convenience store parking lot? Or do you think maybe there was a stranded car set up on the side of the road to attract some good Samaritan into stopping at night? I mean, do we have any kind of clue on what happened, how they came in contact with the person who would take their lives?
Yeah, I think that we could say the word abducted, but I think that one of the things that has to occur prior to abduction is enticement.
Okay.
And so you would have to have a predator, which I think that in this case we could, and we'll get to him in just a moment, but that we could certainly identify the subject as a predator that would be lying in wait. And he is, and Dave, I'm thinking this isolated area, it's not like if you have a Bundy who would go to college campuses and stalk women that fit a type, you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm,
where you
right.
could kind of cull them out in some way. In this particular case, you're at a convenience store. You have no idea who's going to come and go at a convenience store at any point in time. And that's what makes this so chilling. How many times have you pulled up at a convenience store, or maybe you've taken the exit late at night because you got to get gas,
mm-hmm.
and it might be the last place you're going to get gas? Have you ever had that moment, where the hair just kind of stands up on the back of your neck?
Yeah.
I know it's happened to me multiple times. And of course I go nowhere unprotected. I'll put it to you that way. And so even in those circumstances, you arrive in an area where you're thinking, this might not be one of the best decisions I've ever made in my life. Then you begin to think about profiling the victims and the victimology that comes into this. And this is certainly something that we study in academia. And you begin to think about, well, were they familiar with this particular convenience store? Why this particular convenience store? What is it about this one that drew them in? Did they commonly gas up, top off there? Is it a place where they might walk in to buy a pack of cigarettes, to get a stick of gum, whatever the case might be? They felt comfortable because I've been around enough convenience stores. There were, over the course of my career, particularly out on the street, there were some where I could walk in at 1:00 in the morning and I would know the name of the person behind the counter because it was the only thing that was open. And I might even stay in there and drink a cup of coffee and just stand while I was on duty, before I went on to the next thing or went back to my office. So did they have a familiarity? And this is where evil intersects with innocence, because conversely, if you have two victims that perhaps are very familiar with a location like this, that means that this purveyor of evil also had a certain level of familiarity. They knew a place that they could go and hide in the shadows. They knew that place where they would not draw attention until the last second, when they sprung themselves on these poor innocents. I can remember many times over the course of my life where I've driven through the dark, particularly out in the countryside. And not that interstates have a certain level of foreboding to them, But there's something about traveling down a 2-lane road out in the middle of these long stretches, and all you have is company or the ditches on either side of the road or the fence post. You often wonder what's on the other side of the fence post or what's lying in the ditch. And Dave, my understanding is that when both Jennifer and Michelle's remains were found, they happened to be found by a motorcyclist that happened to be going down the road. And can you imagine, and you and I have covered over the years, we've covered any number of cases where people have just found individuals, and Lord have mercy, what this poor individual was the first to behold is something of just absolute nightmare, Dave.
It was 12:30 in the morning when the motorcyclist comes across the bodies. So 2 hours and 15 minutes from the time they're smiling in the convenience store to the time where their lifeless bodies are found on the side of the road. Now, if you're riding a motorcycle, it's 12:30 at night. I'm wondering how they were seen, I guess, is kind of, because it was told as if they were in a remote area alongside of Mill Creek Road, a little more than a mile east of Mission Boulevard, naked. And in this particular case, both a gun and a knife were used. And I have to wonder, was there more than one person involved in the murder?
And I've thought about that as well. But can I tell you something about human skin in the dark?
Yeah.
It's very fascinating that how reflective the human body is nude in the dark when light hits it.
Okay.
And I was thinking about, what you had just said about the motorcyclist, and let's just assume, they're riding, a bike that doesn't have a big bank of lights on it, like some gigantic Harley, it's got like 3 lights across the front, a single headlight that's illuminating the road, and dependent upon the angle at which you turn the handlebars to direct the bike, you're going to catch glimpses of things. And, going down the road and your headlights strike something that's like this. Now, I don't know. I don't think in Fremont, California, they necessarily get a lot of snow. So you're not going to have like this reflectivity. And if you see something that's stark white like this, like these 2 young women would have appeared, it would be something that was quite eye-catching. And I think that adds a certain level of horror to this as well. And I know I've commented on this in the past, but it's like you do the double take where you say, wait, your brain is trying to catch up and you're trying to say, wait, what did I just see? And how many times have I mentioned, where I've interviewed witnesses where they have said, my first thought was, it was a mannequin, because your brain does not want, I think that your humanity does not want you to say that, that this is a fellow human being, and not just a singular, but 2 now. So this is compounded for this individual. I can guarantee you that if this witness, this finder, is still alive, this is something that will haunt them until the day they die, Dave.
I saw a dead body on the side of the road one time that had been shot, and it was in a remote area, a country area. I'm driving down the road and I see what appeared to be a moped on the side of the road tipped over, but I then see a person on the ground, blue jeans and kind of a burgundy overcoat because it was wintertime, but there was skin that I could see because of how he had fallen. And I thought mannequin. I didn't realize that till right now when you said that. That was my first thought, was mannequin. And that was just one person, late in the day.
It's a defense mechanism.
I'll be dog.
I'm almost certain of it. It's a defense. Yeah. And I think another default position we have is animal.
Right.
But, there's nothing that has that anthropomorphic appearance that we do, when you look out there. So when this individual found the remains of Jennifer and Michelle, I'm sure that the first thing that caught their eye was obviously that they're completely nude.
Right.
One other piece to this that's quite chilling was that you remember how I mentioned the fence line just a second ago. As it turns out, when the police arrive at the scene, Dave, did your mama ever dry clothes outside?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. My wife actually, she's begging for me to put up clothesline in the backyard this summer. There's just something about it, right? The freshness of it, and and Dave, Jennifer and Michelle's clothing, their underwear, and their external clothing were hung on the fence, on the barbed wire fence above their bodies. Now, none of their personal items were found, like pocketbooks, that sort of thing. None of that was found. But their clothing was strung about on that length of barbed wire above their bodies. And I really wonder, you come to think of it, now, did the motorcyclist catch sight of the clothing? Or was it the bodies that were there? What is it? But, the cops made note of that when they arrived at the scene. And we can learn a lot about the nature or the dynamic of a crime scene by the way the bodies are treated, in the postmortem state. First off, you're talking about what they say. I've seen ditch and I've seen side of road. So we have to assume, because of water runoff, that the road down alongside, that the ditch or the area alongside the road is going to be slightly depressed, right, for runoff. And did it rise to the occasion where the bodies were very pronounced? But we can learn a lot about this, because when you think about the convenience, if you will, of what a perpetrator is doing with human remains, when they essentially take them and roll them out of a vehicle or pull them out of a vehicle and then lay them out or stack the remains, which does happen sometimes. But then they go to the trouble of taking the clothing and hanging it on the barbed wire, because it's an interesting combination as far as I'm concerned. Why not just wad the clothing up and throw it down? Why not take it away with you and throw it out of the window down the road? But no, you've got clothing that is left immediately adjacent to the bodies hanging on the barbed wire, with, immediately adjacent to Michelle and Jennifer's remains. I know that the police, this is not an area where you would have this type of thing happen, where that would rise to this level just in this isolated location. It's not like you're going into a neighborhood where you have a stalker that's walking through a neighborhood and they're killing women, that are located in a particular neighborhood. I worked a series of homicides in Atlanta. I think they were called the Vine City strangulations, and there were elderly women that were all killed in the Vine City area of Atlanta, where they were killed, and they were elderly ladies. They met a specific demographic, and they were killed primarily in their homes, and that's a place of isolation and protection. Dave, that's not what we're talking about here.
All right, now, Joe, I want to back up to something, because their bodies are found 6 miles from where Xavier's car was recovered.
Yes,
Xavier's car was
like a Pontiac Sunbird.
Yeah, and it was parked in a shopping center, and that's why I'm kind of stuck on. Okay, I'm just going with what we actually know in terms of 10:15. They're at the convenience store, smiling, laughing, moving, and then her car. They wind up being found dead 2 hours, 15 minutes later. But her car is parked 6 miles away in a shopping center, so they had to have interacted with their killer at some point between the convenience store and parking the car in the shopping center.
Yeah.
And Do you think the clothes were taken off before or after they were murdered?
That's an excellent question. I would think that, first off, with gunshot wounds, which we know that one of the victims actually Jennifer met her in with gunshot wounds. One of the things that we do at autopsy is if we have clothing, we will examine both the injuries to the torso, and I'm talking about the physical body, and then examine the clothing as well, that the clothing comes in separate, okay? Because, for instance, if you have a nude body and you have clothing that is adjacent, you're still going to thoroughly examine that clothing to see if it has any bullet hole defects in it, and to see if those areas marry up, with this. Now, when we're talking about the other victim, she has died as a result of her throat being slit, which is a very, very personal thing. I mean, you're talking about a gulf of difference between gunshot wounds and something where you're talking about dragging cold steel blade over the anterior aspect of a young woman's throat. And gunshot, to me, when I think about it, there's a term that doesn't, it's not really used frequently now, but it kind of sums this up, where an individual is dispatched. With gunshot wounds, you think about someone being dispatched, which means that it's essentially a quick modality of death, almost like that they had no utility, that the personal nature of throat being cut, the intimacy of that, there's a different type of perception perhaps in this perpetrator's mind about what, the value that he put on both of these young women. Touch. That's the way we experience the world, isn't it? We sense the world even when we're babies through our hands. All of my precious babies that I've had, both my children and my grandchildren, I was fascinated by their hands when they were little. Would look at them. And of course, I would, particularly with my own children, I would have to admonish them all the time about sticking their hands in their mouth and putting things in their mouth and all that sort of thing. But Dave, hands play a critical role in this double homicide. And here's why. Because it's DNA found beneath the fingertips of Jennifer Duey, and an interesting scribbled little message that was written on the palm of Michelle Xavier's hand that probably arose from something that she bore witness to that night of their deaths.
Now, do we know who was killed first based on the forensics? We know one was shot and we know one was knifed. Now, I would just think if you're one person killing two women, it's going to be the same type of murder. Either they're both shot or both stabbed to death. But in this case, we have two women and one is shot to death. The other has her throat slit. Did he run out of bullets and use the knife to slice their throat? I mean, I guess I'm having trouble figuring this out, Joe. Were they tied up? Was he terrorizing them, peeling their skin? What was going on?
There's no evidence of restraint here, but there is evidence of rape. Rape for us, we don't just, everybody talks about, well, you do the rape kit, and you're looking for hair because we do pubic combings. And obviously we do the swabs. Everybody's familiar with the swabs, and we look for seminal deposition. But there's another thing that we look for with rape cases, and that is forced sexual trauma. Okay, so if you've got an unwilling participant, they're fighting against this, and the individual is trying to have penetrative sex with them. You can get little tears. You can get little contusions. I've seen women that have been assaulted with foreign objects in order for the perpetrator to then thusly gain access to them. So that's, it's not, I think that people limit themselves to thinking about crime or rape kits, and that is a big part of it, but you also look for external trauma, vaginal trauma, rectal trauma, that sort of thing, or anal trauma rather, and little tears and contusions and that sort of thing. But they did have evidence of rape for both of these women. Now, as far as the trying to pare down the order in which Jennifer and Michelle died, I don't know that is necessarily possible. However, what is possible is that a forensic pathologist could hold forth on the level of trauma and the instrument of death that was utilized as far as how quickly they may have died. Like if you've got someone, obviously, that's shot in the head, execution style, that death is going to be very, very quick, okay? Or even maybe a well-placed shot in the chest, okay? It's going to happen very quickly. The slitting of the throat, though, is not something that happens quickly. This is a bleeding out where, you've got the blood that's coursing through the body. Someone that is being attacked like this already, their adrenaline is pumping, heart rate is up, and that might expedite things. But it's nowhere like, even close to head trauma, right? Either whether the head is crushed or whether they are shot. The cutting of the throat, that would be a slow death.
Now you mentioned writing on the palm. Are we saying, does it appear the forensic evidence shows that one of these ladies was able to be alive long enough to make out a partial license plate and write it down on the palm of her hand while she's dying?
Yeah. I hate the word. I've come to hate the word brave nowadays,
right? Because
it's thrown around for people that don't necessarily deserve to have the word brave thrown their way.
Right.
I've seen bravery. I've seen attempts at true bravery. Mm-hmm. And you've got these people out there, well, bravery comes in all forms.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. Not when you're talking about this. That scribbling on the hand by Michelle, that turned out to be a partial license plate number for a motorcycle, Dave. And it was only partial. So it's not something, when all of the other evidence came in, you could go back reflectively. And isn't it amazing, Dave, how over years and over time, and we can see this borne out in our lives collectively, right? You don't get the full picture when you're in the middle of things, do you?
Right.
And so when you get the full view of what these women went through that night, you see the scope of this and how in her moments, those moments, and we don't know how close to death she was when she still had the cognitive ability to take a pen and write down a license plate number, or at least an attempt to do this, in order to remember it, perhaps, maybe holding out hope that she would survive the event, or maybe, and I don't know that any 20 or 18-year-old in their life thinks in these terminal ideas or perceptions where I need to have this down for posterity so that they can go back and find this guy after I'm dead. But at any rate, it was scribbled down, and that's kind of fascinating. I don't recall a case like this where I know that it has occurred.
Sure.
But for me personally, where we've covered it, certainly on body bags, I don't remember anything like this. But with the true biological evidence, this case occurred, Dave, back in in 1986, and I was a very young investigator back then, and we had none of the DNA technology back then that exists now.
Yeah,
it was there, but it was you might as well have been talking about going to Mars. You knew that it's plausible, but you didn't really know that it could actually happen. And so it wasn't until 2016 when they were able to tag back with DNA evidence that was actually found beneath the fingernails of Jennifer Duey, where she had scraped the individual.
This was
that data.
This was a huge case when it happened. The double homicide of two young women. It was big news, and it really got a lot of coverage at the time. And they really investigated. It wasn't like this case was kind of blown off by a small group of police. They investigated it hard and heavy for an extended period of time, and were really frustrated that they could not resolve this. And it took years, but in 2016, and I think this is something we're finding more and more often, thankfully, that cold case squads are put together in departments all over, and there's funding being made available. And that's what happened in this case when there's a guy named Sergeant Jacob Blass, and he started with the police department in Fremont like 19 years, before the resolution of the case. And he had become part of the cold case squad that would look into these cases, and he became kind of the DNA expert. And they were able to use that evidence, underneath the fingernails that they took from 1986 to actually come up and find the guy who did it. And the reason we're now talking about this case, I have questions for you about the bodies, but the reason we're talking about it is because of what the murderer did. After everything is said and done, he gets away with this particular murder for nearly 40 years. And then at sentencing, during the family and friends impact statements over what, happened, to them, how they were emotionally impacted by the death of these wonderful young ladies. And he is so disrespectful that the news goes worldwide because of his deportment during these impact statements and during sentencing, because just a monster. But Joe, you've got one woman shot and the other one killed with a knife. Is that indicative of running out of bullets? Is it indicative of him having a close relationship with one of the women? Did he have her? Did they have contact before? I mean, what does the mode of death, the using a gun and a knife, does that mean anything as an investigator, or is it just happened?
Well, for me, it shows, I think, and this is borne out, Dave, it shows to me someone that is a predator, that somebody that is skilled at doing this and has done it before. They show up with multiple weapons. That's referred to as redundancy, that they have a fallback position with this. They're not going to just leave it to chance, that they're not going to, and I'll use this word again, be able to dispatch the individuals. No one's going to get out of here alive. That save that individual, the perpetrator. That they're going to use this opportunity to end the life. Now, and it's going to be his choice. It's either going to be by the blade or the bullet. I suppose that we could say running out of bullets, but I don't necessarily think that's the case here. I'm talking about someone that is animalistic, that is a predator, that is seeking out to do harm, that from beginning to end, that it was his own personal sexual gratification, that he was out to do this. And we're not just talking about the act of sex. I think that the violence that's involved in this is part of the act itself. And this is borne out in this perpetrator's past, Dave.
And he was already in jail at the time this was going on for another murder. He is the suspect in another cold case involving a 9-year-old girl who was abducted in a parking lot and died. He's going to be facing trial for that. So David Misch, the guy who is the convicted murderer of these two women, What did he do at sentencing, Joe, that caused this to go worldwide? There was one specific thing.
Yeah, because this is what caught my attention about
Right.
Dave. I was actually, I think I was actually I may have just gotten out of the hospital, and I saw this, and I was like, we've got to have a discussion about this, because first off, let me make a broad statement here to begin with. I am seeing a thread in these courtrooms over the last few years where you have more and more of these convicted individuals that have now been adjudicated guilty by the state, that are absent of any level of decorum. And that decorum is not necessarily, I wouldn't necessarily expect someone like this individual to understand decorum. However, the court does understand decorum. I don't know how you go about admonishing them. I mean, what are you going to do to him, at this point in time? Because he's already institutionalized. That's his mentality. He's just going back. They're not going to give him the needle in California. It's just added on to his sentence. It means nothing to him. And it's so dismissive. It's not like he sat there at the table and began to openly weep and showed any level of contrition whatsoever, and beg and plead for forgiveness and openly weep to display how sorrowful he was. No, Dave, he started singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall. Let's let that sink in just for a second. These family members who have been grieving low these many years, we're talking almost 40 years, Dave. And this guy, who has now been adjudicated as guilty, begins to sing this song. And they had to physically remove him. It's probably overly dramatic on my part to say that it's like he's killing them all over again. I hate that term because they are dead, but it is certainly it drops to such a level of an attempt to humiliate and debase a family that he's already done this to. How much deeper can you go? I don't know. It was, and that's what really caught my attention about this, that someone could be absent any kind of remorse whatsoever that they would do this. And what's fascinating, Dave, is that this precious little 9-year-old girl, that they have now charged him in this case. This case is going to come about. Now he's got 3 convictions to this point. This guy is a serial killer and a serial perpetrator, because he had already done earlier on in his life, he had already done a turn in jail for a rape committed at knife point of an elderly lady, Dave, and they only gave him 2 years for that. And then they cut him loose. And now we've got this little 9-year-old girl. And what's fascinating about this is that this precious little angel had gone into a store with one of her friends, and they were on their little scooters. And the victim came out of the store, and she was apparently standing on her scooter. Dave, they were able to lift a print off of her scooter of this perpetrator and tie it back to him. And that's going to be, this is how hands play into all of this, right? Even in this particular case, this is going to come back to haunt him. They still have yet to find her body, Dave. He discarded her like rubbish, like he did with Jennifer and Michelle. But I know that thankfully he's off the street now, Dave.
And has been, and thankfully so. You're right. But now he's getting attention for singing 99 bottles of beer on the wall because that is so offensive. And I'm not glad, but bringing attention to these women after all these years.
Yeah.
Letting criminals know, hey guys,
Well, that's
you
a
know
good
what?
point. Yeah.
You might have thought you got away with this, but you haven't.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah,
covered
well
a lot
said.
of these lately, Joe. And I'm going to follow the case of the 9-year-old and see what comes out of that trial. And we might revisit this.
Yeah, I think I would like to, because that little angel, her body's never been found, and I would like for there to be some kind of conclusion. I think arrived at with her to try to understand, what may have become of her. Her family's still out there; they're still grieving. And I don't know, given the level of disregard for human life by singing 99 bottles of beer. I think that if you're looking to him for answers for the remains of 9-year-old Michaela Garrett, I don't necessarily see him being a font of information. But maybe, Dave, you never know with these things. You never know if enough pressure can be applied. Maybe he'll be able to give some clues to the authorities as to what became of her little body as well. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.